So I think you can always get started when you find some kind of platform that has a win-win from having you, and you also get something back from this, right? So first of all, you get practice in. This is how I started with the product people. I don't think it was a particularly good talk, but I got 2 or 3 consulting clients out of this. And I'm not saying that now everybody should do it just to do consulting gigs and so forth. It's just that I kind of already trusted myself that I have a good personality on screen for some reason and that this is one of my strengths. Now, if it's one of your strengths, then, like just lean into it. Try to go a little bit with it. If you don't enjoy this kind of stuff, you probably will never enjoy it. So just practice as much as you have to kind of get to some kind of level, and then it's kind of fine. Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Tharin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have the distinct pleasure of connecting with the one and only Leah Tharin. Leah is best known as the creator of the wildly and infamously successful fictional character Gary. Gary is a despicable B2B SaaS sales guy who spends his days overpromising features to potential customers, thereby sabotaging the success of his own company to earn his bonus. Gary has created unity across countless product and development teams by providing the joy of a shared hatred that only a common enemy as uniquely destructive as Gary can offer. Leah is also famous for her groundbreaking meme generation platform, Memed In, offering the most cutting-edge insights on product and SaaS via the scroll-stopping format of viral memes. And a recent study from McKinsey reported that 63% of SaaS CEO perspectives were largely informed and or created by Memed In. Besides Gary and Memed In, Leah also enjoys her hobby of working as a product and growth executive for B2B scale-ups. You can learn more at leahtharin.com. What would you rate that intro?
That was pretty good. I would give it an 8. I'm not sure where the meme din stuff came in from because I'm always serious, right? I don't make jokes about anyone. But yeah, I'm very glad that you also already mentioned my most proud achievement in my entire professional career, the creation of a meme, which is scary.
I love it. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for hosting me on my own show.
Absolutely. Tell us, what is something people get wrong about you?
Well, people get wrong about me. They sometimes think that I'm actually hosting the show, but I'm not. just a regular guest.
I have been the behind-the-scenes mastermind for years now, right?
Yeah, for years. Well, not exactly, but so what are the reasons why I invited you to invite me on my own podcast?
You're actually overselling this you hosting thing a little bit.
No, it's fine. I mean, for today's episode, you are. And it's because, I never get to talk about this particular topic. And I feel like you're the only one that I know who talks about public speaking, right? So, I mean, maybe you can also introduce yourself for the audience, but hey, it's not my show.
100%. Yes. So for anybody tuning in, I'm Vince, just a friend of Leah. I'm a public speaking coach. And yeah, I was so honored you asked me to come on to just talk about the topic of public speaking, maybe specifically in tech, right? Which has been something that you've been well known for. You've probably got the most I don't know if there's any other tech people I know that have a talk that has sort of gotten around and become associated with their career and their persona. So I think it's a unique thing, and I'm so excited to talk about it with you. So let's see, let's jump into this one. Tell us just your journey of public speaking. Did you do it as a high school student, speech class? Take us back to the very beginning. It's most people's biggest fear, right? So just tell us how you got into it.
That's a good question. So first of all, I'm not prepared for this talk, so you will see whether I can actually also speak just off the record.
By the end of this, you're at least going to have a ton of empathy for your guests, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, it's not that I'm not on other podcasts, but
Yep.
I think this is sort of a topic that I have not practiced.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Other than the practical part of it. Okay, so anyways, so I was not part of any speaking classes or public speaking. This does not exist in Europe, right? We don't have that. But I think I always kind of enjoyed teaching things to others in general, like board games or explaining how things work, because I get always very passionate about the things that I do. Sometimes to a failure as well. But I think I just know that this is giving me a lot of energy. Speaking in front of people on a stage per se, I only started to do, I think the first time I was at Microsoft for internal courses and stuff when I was doing UX engineering obviously also when I was, like founding a startup with my dad and so forth, you start to speak in front of rooms, like of people like 10, 15, maybe, something like that. If it's a bigger event, then maybe 50 or 100 people and so forth. But that was pretty much the maximum. And I did not consider myself to be a very good speaker because I just simply also I did not enjoy particularly the crowds, at least at the beginning.
Mm,
And funny enough, really the first time that I really put myself out there, and out there I mean into the market, was about 3 to 4 years ago when I was producing something for the product people in Berlin,
mm.
which was a talk about how to scale, or like the puberty scaling pains for companies. That was sort of the first time where I really put myself out there, because before that, I frankly also have to tell you that I was always afraid of criticism a lot, very, very fragile and really not thinking a lot about myself in terms of public speaking ability.
Yeah, so there's been sounds like several points on the journey of kind of growing into it. Take us back to those first Microsoft talks. So you were on the team there?
Yeah. So I was part of the central marketing group, which basically means that they gave us basically everything that they could not really fit into classical marketing. So they call it central marketing group. I was responsible for some of the web design for Microsoft Switzerland, like all the websites there. I mean, not just the web design, but like, also publishing, like when the bigger rollouts of the products came around and so forth. So for instance, I think this was the time of Windows Vista,
Mm,
which is a complete clusterfuck. But anyways, I think my first kind of touch there with talking to others was, this cross-functional kind of knowledge transfer when you try to explain what you do to others, more like, hey, don't you just want to, we called it also an intranet, like you had this intranet space where you're always like, hey, look what this other colleague over there does and that you're definitely not interested in. And this was kind of like the first time where I kind of started to talk to others and so forth.
yep.
While I think I was always very good in one-on-one conversations because I'm a UX researcher by trade. So it was not that unusual for me to keep a conversation going, to listen as well,
Yep.
as unbelievable as that sounds. But it was not new to me on like how to get conversations going, despite me being an introvert. But I do know that it only works when I'm really interested in something. So I'm absolutely terrible in doing small talk. It's just not working.
That makes sense. Do you remember that actual first talk you did, whether it was at Microsoft or in some other setting where it's like you walking up there, room full of people, just got to do a monologue? Do you remember like the first one that feels significant in your mind?
I'm not really sure. I think I gave once, there are these investment clubs, like where people come together with too much money and then they talk about what they should invest their money into. And my dad is a really, really smart investor in general, like stock market and some other things, not like on the high money side. It's just like, like private people, like let's call them middle class, just like middle class people, like sitting together and investing their money. And he asked me to speak once in front of all of his friends. And I think this was the first time where I was really, really afraid of, like not performing, because first of all, this is my dad
Yep.
with whom I have, like, I just, I don't want him to have a bad opinion on me. So I could not fail in this regard. And yeah, it was all like, these were all strangers, because when you're doing it in a job, it's kind of like you have some familiar faces in the audience. And to me, the only familiar face in the audience was my dad, who I highly respect, and just, it's your dad, right? Like you don't want to mess it up. But I think this is what I would say that was the defining one, more so than the professional stuff, because that stuff you get used to, I think.
Yes. Yes, that totally makes sense. Do you remember what you did to prep for that talk or like any of the content that like sticks in your mind?
I think I always do it the same way. I wait until there is only one day left to prepare.
Really?
Yeah, and then I kind of jump into it and write most of my material. This has always been the case because I always try to kind of understand things from a first principles perspective, right? Like I'm not someone that just like, I don't do speaker notes, for instance. I've never done that.
Meaning you have your slides prepped, but not any notes that are like adjacent to the slide on the little monitor in front of you. Interesting.
I don't do those. I feel like when I'm writing or like when I'm reading off speaker notes, until today, I think it just sounds wooden.
Yes.
So I have a
Yes.
very strange obsession with myself, in that since I was having my first phone, or like when it was like the first time where you started to get voice messages, like you started to send voice messages to other people over WhatsApp, or now it's Telegram or Signal or whatever you want to call this, right? Like the first kind of time where you get voice messages. Whenever I did send people voice messages, I listened them immediately back. I kind of do this all the time, right? Or like when I send people emails, I immediately open them up again in the sent folder. Not before I send them, of course, because then I could still change something. And I try to kind of imagine, so how does this feel when someone is listening to this? And it was always a very, very weird obsession that I had through my entire life. Maybe not a healthy one either.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, because I cared so much about like what do other people hear when they hear me, right? And then I was like sending corrections. Hey, but like in this one, I did not mean in this way, and it was really, really obsessive in a not good way. But I think it also gave me an appreciation on like how I do come across. I think I have a relatively good self reflection also to this day on what I can do better as a speaker because I'm listening back on this entire stuff, and at some point you just become comfortable with hearing your own voice. You know, like I watch my own podcast episodes, I watch my own speeches, and so forth. And yeah, sometimes I just forget what I was talking about. It's like listening to a new talk. I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So the idea of having notes that you're kind of reading during a talk just feels probably like the worst thing ever. It's so obvious to you that it's like not a natural delivery, which I would totally agree with. I think it's so worth it not using them and figuring out how to deliver without them. Do you remember the first like quote unquote big talk you did? Big room, few thousand people. What was that sort of first large talk like?
So I think there's different sizes of audiences, just like you have different stages in a company, right? So like in terms of how the dynamics kind of sort of play out. I think if you're sitting around the family table, what you have is usually you do not have a microphone. So I don't know about you, but maybe you do.
At my family gatherings, we all have a microphone actually.
Yeah, but you don't. Okay, I could imagine that with Anthony. That would not surprise me. But like, so you don't have a microphone. You do not have any sound equipment and so forth. And I'm mentioning this because this is starting to play a role once you start to get to the bigger stages, right? So, like, say you have an intimate room and you're just speaking in front. There's not that much happening, right? Like everybody knows how this feels. But then I think the first change happens with like 50 people. With 50 people, you have these product meetups, you know, like let's get together, let's spend an afternoon with Leah and so forth. There's an agenda, right? Like someone is announcing you in some kind of way. You have to be there. With the family, you can just say, like, I don't feel like I'm just going to stay in bed. So there's a new element of you having to perform at a specific date and time. So usually it's going to hinge on you that this is going to be a successful thing. But you still oftentimes do not have a microphone yet because you can speak in front of 50 people. So I also had to learn how to speak loud. It almost feels like theatrics in the sense of like you have to speak loud because your voice is not amplified otherwise. You also want to kind of pay a lot of attention to like individuals in the room. You start to know people, how they react. And like, you know, you also have a lot of conversations going back and forward because 50 people, that's less of a conversation than the family table, but it is still something. And then I think after like, there's another bracket around 200 people where you need a microphone most of the time. You have some lights, but you can still see the entire room. And I think with like 800 to 1,000 people, this is what I would consider large, also for our industry, where you usually do not see the audience anymore. And it is not because the room is dark, it's just because there's so much light on you. Like the contrast is so big that you don't see people anymore. So you're kind of in this walled off thing. You have a microphone, your voice is very much amplified, which means you also hear yourself back at the same time. And the first time you're doing this, so like if I can give any tip to anyone, if you're ever first time on this on a stage like this, do go for rehearsal. It will feel very, very different than what you think it is. And yeah, I'm trying to remember which one was the first one. I'm not that good like in timelines, but I'll think about it. Maybe I'll come back to it afterwards. But I think it must have been something around like 6 to 7, 800 people, because 200 people was still kind of manageable. But this is the first time where you're really gonna be like, oh, okay, this is real. You have speaker announcements, you have big slides that are just gonna go on screen. There will be a recording. There's makeup artists sometimes and so forth, and that's just how it feels for me. Yeah.
That's interesting. It doesn't stick like in your head, those first ones or first sort of, more quote unquote scary ones. I think most communicators, those memories are burned into their brains, which to me is maybe a sign that it's just come more naturally for you because it's not this sort of traumatic memory of, oh, this was the first time I had to get up there in front of a big crowd. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, it does. But what I struggle with is like putting together a timeline, right? Like I do not have a good feeling for like when what happened. I'm quite famous for that as well. So I do not know whether which talk comes before the other one. I do remember though the ones that gave me trouble for sure.
Really? Tell us about one of those.
So I think I was at Touring Fest. That must have been 2 years ago or something. And there is this weird thing sometimes when you go on stage where you get a little bit of stage fright. I think it's natural to have this anyways, but usually it goes away after like 3 to 4 minutes. But when it doesn't, and then you're sort of just like you're on an automatic roll. You're just like rolling it off in the way that you practiced it, but you're not really in control, right? You're kind of like on autopilot. And I don't know whether it had anything to do with this, but I was always very conscious about my posture also on stage because I had good friends tell me, like, Leah, you look like a cave woman if you're standing on stage sometimes, like you do this, you're slouching and so forth. This was also before I started to do a lot of strength training. And then I had this thing here. So this is a really weird product placement here. It's called Upright Go, which is a little device that you put on the back of your neck that tells you as soon as you're slouching, right? Like it vibrates. So you're standing up. So this is for speakers. Good tool to kind of, stand up again. The problem is it also occupies some of your mental space because you're like, oh shit, like I should stand up and so forth. And this was a bit of a weird the conference itself was great, but my talk was I think it landed well with people, but I did not know how I did until the end. And that was a bit weird. I had no idea was I doing really well or not. Everybody, people always tell you anyways that you're doing well and so forth. And then when I was looking back at it, I started to notice that I was kind of acting like someone that was in a crowd of 50 people. And that is weird, right? Like when you start to talk to individuals in the crowd, but it's like 800 people. You cannot do that anymore. The entire thing felt a little bit off. I was talking too much off camera. And then the recording also did not record the audience reactions, which make it also quite weird, like when everybody's laughing and you're just like,
Yes, they don't like turn up the room mics. That's always awkward when that happens. Yeah, yes.
so I think from the outcome of the recording, I think I really underperformed, and that was sticking with me a little bit. But I don't think I ever really bombed with the bigger audiences because I just had so much practice from beforehand, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes total sense. That sounds like an insanely stressful moment though. Already kind of anxious and then something vibrating on your neck on your neck the whole time. That sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, but it's like, women are trained to just be always, looking into like, how do I stand? How do I come across? I cannot do this. I cannot do that, and so forth. And I was kind of okay. I don't do this, by the way, anymore. I'm just wearing heels because that also straightens you up a little bit. And it's fine. If it's cave woman Leia providing a good talk, that's fine too.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. A lot of people I talk to are trying to sort through like what role speaking has in a tech career, how
Mm.
much to go after it, how much to embrace it, what difference does it really make? Speak to that person who's maybe done one talk, maybe two, and is thinking, should I get into this? What's really the ROI? Maybe especially for the person that it doesn't come as naturally for. I mean, you could talk about that from your own career or just how you've seen that working in other people's careers. What are your thoughts?
I think it depends a little bit. So I'm not sure. Let's see how this feels when I'm saying it. So I think that CEOs in general don't necessarily have to be stage talkers, but they need to be able to speak well to a crowd of 10, 15 people, because this is where you go VC funding and so forth. You also need to hold yourself in an all hands meeting and so forth. So I think it's kind of a little bit necessary, of course. As a CPO, though, like as a chief product officer at scale or anyone that is a senior leader, I think if you cannot speak really, really well on stage, because you will get into all hands meetings where you have 150 people cross functionally listening to you. And the future is about aligning salespeople, marketing, and product together, which have all three different lingos and vocabulary. Then you have no business doing that, unfortunately, because you really should learn it, right? It really pisses me off when I see senior leaders just like not being able to give concise presentations on topics, because I don't talk about this a lot because it's not necessarily related to PLG, but I think they constantly overestimate how much people can retain. So they just rattle off point and point and point and point. Everybody checks out after 5 minutes. And then it gets to this kind of point where everybody's like, yeah, but we said this in this meeting like 2 months ago. And I'm like, yeah, but you put everybody to sleep first, right? Larry or Perry or whatever you want to call the guy from product.
Worse than Gary.
Yeah, but this is really a problem because if you cannot talk to a big group of people, you should not be a senior leader. I'm really sorry. Like, this is the kind of thing that I'm trying to get at. So, how do you get started? Well, this is something that comes with practice, but I think the most important thing about practice is that you're going to be having some kind of feedback loop in this, right? So my feedback loop is I'm listening back to my own stuff. I'm not afraid of it. I'm also looking at this critical. I'm not just doing this to be like, oh, look how cool I am. It's really about being critical about yourself. Maybe getting a public speaking coach like you are is someone that does that. I've never done that myself, but I feel like a lot of people could profit from this 100%. Because what you really need is you want to have someone that knows how a good talk looks like, give you feedback, and then you're listening, and then you go back. It is a muscle that you have to train. There's no other way.
Can I ask a deeper question there? Because this is something I'm trying to sort through even with clients. A lot of them, so let's go to that CEO doing the all hands or a CPO with, the different teams there, 150 people, a lot at stake in terms of getting people aligned, getting people moving. My perception has been a lot of them, if they have any sense of need to improve in their communication, they're thinking a lot about delivery. Do I seem confident? Am I present? Am I engaged? When in reality, the problem is often less about delivery and more about content. Like you said, there's all these points back to back to back that people are not tracking with because it's just too much information for one talk. And they get up there and they're like, oh, am I going to seem like I've got it all together? When in reality, the problem starts earlier down the chain when they're putting their outline together. How do you get the need to craft the content differently? Like, how does that eventually register for people? And maybe that's just people getting feedback, the feedback loop, like you talked about. But I feel like that is not always, but a lot of times the bigger issue than just the delivery. Does that make sense?
So I think try to write this out in my leadership guide at some point, like last year or something. Like I was actually trying to kind of bring to paper what my concept is when I'm doing, public speaking or like any presentation, because public speaking is not just like in the public, right? Like, as you said, it can also be like in front of a big all hands. And I think there's always kind of like three things that you need to get over with. So like, or that you need to ensure before you can do anything. And I actually don't think that it comes to the content before these three things. So the first one is the language. Can people understand what I say? We have this sickness in Western society or whatever to just speak convoluted because we want to look credible. Or, like we somehow just like forget sometimes that we're using abbreviations that we should not use and so forth, right? So like speaking a language that others understand is very important. And I spend in every one of my talks, coming to the content again, I always create context about what I'm talking about. I always use the first 5 minutes. I always do this. I don't care whether someone has seen it already 10, 20, 15 times. I don't care. So for instance, if you're going into an all hands and you're talking about, hey, our sales pipeline is collapsing and we need to fix this and so forth, you should always create the context to this again, because there's always this one person who was sick before that did not listen, someone that had diarrhea and they just put like they went to the toilet when he was talking about the first time. So how does this connect to the strategy? And again, this is never wasted time. Never, ever, ever, ever. The problem is as well is that people who think that they should know something because it is their job will not tell you that they didn't listen last time. So you just have to assume that they do not know, right? No salesperson will tell you that, oh, they do not understand what a product manager really does, because you kind of expect them to do, right? So this is the first problem. So terminology, I always declare it. I always make sure it's simple. I'm talking about simple language as well. And then there's also about the context in this language, where I'm saying like, where do they come from? Is it a Friday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? Makes actually a difference. Is it right after lunch? Is it right in the morning? Is everybody tired and so forth? This can make a little bit of a difference. So that's the first thing. Like, this is really the language, like, do you want me to just jump on top of you and be like, hey, look, it's morning. Yeah. Whoa, what the fuck, right? Or are people still waking up and having to get their coffees and so forth? And in all hands, you have control over this because you know when it is, right? So don't go into long lengths on Friday at 5. It's just not happening, right? Keep it short, respect the audience, know that they're already halfway in the weekend. The second thing is the credibility. It's like, can people really believe what I say is true? This obviously comes through the content as well. But I think, so a pet peeve that I really do not like is when people say things that do not track with what they're doing. For instance, leaders saying that, oh yeah, we make mistakes all the time. That's a very, very big one, right? Like, but they're not willing to tell you which mistakes they do, right? They're never really specific. Oh, 98% of all companies make this particular mistake. And then you're not explaining, like, so where does this number come from? Why is it 90%? Why is it not 90? Why is it 85? Just cut the bullshit, right? Like, don't start to claim things just so they sound nice. Be credible in what you say, like declare sources. Also say when you're not sure about something. That's also something. So credibility is extremely important. And the last one is like this really important concept of bandwidth. Like, can people retain what I say? And usually people can retain way less than what you think. So it is language, it's credibility, and it's this bandwidth that you really have to do together. Understand, believe, and retain. That's how I think about that.
I love that. Is that a framework you just kind of developed over the years of doing it?
I just wrote it down in my guide there on the leadership side because I feel like it's such a critical thing. But I guess it also applies to public speaking in that sense. But I did not think about this and then I try to apply it. It's just like how I do it. And for me, it seems to work, right? I know that for some people, this does not work because they need speaker notes. They need to be thinking about these things a little bit different. For me, it's always like I always try to build it up like this.
Yep. Context, credibility, bandwidth.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. I like want to go deeper into that, but also want to ask you some other things. Let's go specifically conference speaking. What ROI is there on that for a tech leader? I think the all hands one is so obvious and clear. You got to be able to inspire your people, but you've also had sort of a speaking career outside of teams you've led, right? Is that something when you're mentoring or coaching up and coming younger leaders, do you encourage them to pursue that? Does it depend on the person? What are your thoughts?
So it depends what you're asking right now. So, like, if you talk about speaking gigs and the money it pays as a speaking fee, there is a specific limit between, I would say, €1,000 per speaking gig to 45,000 for product conferences. 45,000 being really the biggest heads in tech. I'm not getting paid that much for sure, not, but trying to get there. And then there's sales conferences. So like there's these two kind of verticals. Sales conferences pay a lot different, but they also have a different energy, right? Like you need to be more like on the macho side and you need to be very forceful and system, like it's still like the same kind of culture. But these are more like on the speaking fees, right? So usually in product, we're not getting paid as much. And I don't want to say that 45,000 is not as much, but this is really for the biggest people in product and so forth. Maybe even more for people like Zuckerberg or Sam Altman or I don't know, whatever, the Grahams of the world, that whatever they're going to charge, it doesn't matter. But if we talk about the ROI in terms of like, hey, what does this give to you if you actually go out and also spread your message, like in conferences and so forth, I think this is very, very valuable. So I think you can always get started when you find some kind of platform that has a win-win from having you, and you also get something back from this, right? So first of all, you get practice in. This is how I started with the product people. I don't think it was a particularly good talk, but I got 2 or 3 consulting clients out of this. And I'm not saying that now everybody should do it just to do consulting gigs and so forth. It's just that I kind of already trusted myself that I have a good personality on screen for some reason and that this is one of my strengths. Now, if it's one of your strengths, then, like just lean into it. Try to go a little bit with it. If you don't enjoy this kind of stuff, you probably will never enjoy it. So just practice as much as you have to kind of get to some kind of level, and then it's kind of fine. On the other side, I think if you practice like this, it's way easier to kind of speak in front of a 600 people or 1,000 people audience like this, right? Like remote rather than standing in front of them, because the energy is a completely different one. So I think remote public speaking, like attending events and giving presentations, is such a wonderful thing. And I think everybody should do it if you have the ability to. I don't coach that many people, definitely not on public speaking. Maybe I should. But I think it's always a good thing to kind of practice that, because you usually get a recording that you really have to watch afterwards as well for the intent of like, hey, this is how that felt. Because if you're a C-level, you usually don't get a lot of feedback. I also started to notice that if you go into a company and you are the C-level that comes in, you're the boss, right? And that's not a good thing for feedback.
Yeah, that's so true. I love it. Those are great insights. I see that a lot with the people. They might not get paid a lot speaking, but they often generate a lot of business from getting clients or whatever.
So just really quickly on this point, maybe I think the future of B2B content generation or whatever it is really about attaching a face to a specific company, right? Because people really do not want it. They don't care about companies anymore. They care about people who work in these particular companies. So like rather than being a fan of like a specific restaurant chain, you're probably more a fan of the specific cook that cooks there, right? So like this would be a good metaphor. And I think in this regard, you can really give yourself a good face. You also see how the audience reacts to this, right? That's another thing. Like sometimes you bomb, or like sometimes your topic is just not as good. I mean, I can make maybe a more boring topic a little bit more engaging, but I can also not save everything. So I think there's a good ROI there as well, where you see like how the market reacts to specific messages.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. Let's talk about Gary. You mentioned before that you typically will write the talk the day before. Was that true with the Gary one?
Yeah, about 2 days. I mean, I sometimes have some individual ideas. So my next talk is happening in a week.
Haven't touched it.
I have not really touched it. I know it's going to be amazing, but it's going to be like 20 minutes. Yeah. I also said that it's going to be my best stand up special that I ever did.
Oh my goodness. That is so fascinating. That is rare to write it a couple days before, I think. If it works for you, do it. If it works, do it.
Yeah, but this is not like a new topic where I'm just having to do like a ton of research, right? Like this is always like, coming up with some spin. I'm just trying to write it. It's almost like writing an article, right? Like I have a specific idea. I gave already the topic. So the topic will be Gary, stop trying to kill product-led growth. And then I'm going to talk about it.
So some stuff sort of repurposed and repackaged that you've done before.
I'm trying not to. But obviously, I mean, the core message is oftentimes the same-ish, I would say. But I'm really trying right now to move more up market. So I try to speak more to bigger companies. So at least like 50 million in revenue. And there the story changes a little bit, right? Like, so I have to prove in my talk as well by association that I know what I'm talking about when we're talking about sales pipelines, right? So because this is usually what it is, right? So like sales and PLG and so forth. And this is maybe also a tip to others and so forth. Instead of saying that you know things, you need to just demonstrate them, right? So like if I bring specific insights from CROs and specific things that you can only know if you have worked with these companies, then you don't need to say afterwards, hey, I'm Leah, I'm really good at this, right? That's kind of like building rapport also with your audience, I feel like, and is very important because you cannot hide behind this.
Yep. So did you create Gary 2 days before the Gary talk, or was Gary a character you had already built?
The first talk where I talked about him, it was really like 2 days before, yeah. And then I saw how the crowd went wild for it, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna keep Gary around. That's fine. I did not expect this much of a resonance.
Yes. I know the whole intro I did was mostly a joke, obviously, but it does seem like people will leave you comments about Gary like regularly. Like, does it feel like a big part of your online persona now?
All the time. It's also a good starting. Like it's a conversation starting. Oh, I love it. Did you see Gary over there? Right? Like the other day, someone came actually from sales whose name is Gary, and he said, like, hey, thank you for making my life so miserable.
Oh my
But
goodness.
it's great. It's like this is the thing about comedy as well, because I talked about this with my editor as well the other day. Alex, it was a great editor on this, and he's also a stand-up comedian. I said that look, I mean, humor at the heart of it is usually criticizing something that is very real, right? And something that actually is very painful. And for a lot of people working with sales is extremely painful. And yeah, there's some kind of truth around this, but I don't have a method on like how to create a meme that's kind of sticking in the industry. I haven't talked about Gary in a long time, but people are still referencing it. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I need to bring him back.
Oh my goodness, that's so funny. When you sit down to write, do you have a framework or template that you generally stick to in like terms of how the logic flows from start to finish, plug and play kind of thing?
I think for public speaking, where you have 20 to 30 minutes and like there's a lot of writing on it, where it's just not cool if you just like lose your thread and so forth. I think it's less about the structure, it's more about how much you practice it. So what I tend to do is like I try to write the bigger points, the title slides or whatever you want to call it, like in between, and then I'm trying to fill in between. And then from there I start to present and then I'm like, okay, now here it's kind of feels a bit weird, right? Like it doesn't sound well anymore. Like it just does not sound like if you just hear this for the first time, this does not sound that coherent anymore. But then at some point, like I can kind of finish it. Usually the first 5 minutes, as I said, is always an introduction about PLG. I always try to make a new one, right? Like a new examples, new kind of perspective in this regard. And then I time that because I find it very, very helpful that you, instead of just like timing the entire talk, which can take a lot of time to get done because every time you do change something, you have to time the entire thing again, time your sections. So what I mean with that is that let's say you have an intro and you have kind of like this overall story that you want to have and you say like, hey, like the first part is done, like the first third. Just record the time that it takes for you to run through this. And then it's like 6 to 7 minutes, right? And then if you change something in the second part, you only have to measure again like the second part. I felt I kind of learned that you don't need to be overly precise on this, but it does help very, very much to know where the middle is of your presentation. And what I mean with that is like the time middle. So, like at this point, 12 minutes should have been passed because when you are on stage, you see always the remaining time. So, before you go on stage, be prepared that when it says 12 minutes, I should be past that point. If I'm not, then I need to speed up. If I'm way past that point, I can slow down, I can chill out, I can take it easy. Anything more elaborate, I don't think that it works really out. Always be on time on big stages. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's really good. We talked a little bit about, like the power of humor, obviously just now staying on time. Any other sort of hot takes on public speaking in tech, especially in the conference world? When you go to a conference, are you just thinking, gosh, if they could all just grab onto XYZ, what do you think?
This is a bit of an advanced one because most people are probably not in the right frame of mind in that sense. But I told you about the context before, right? So, like the language that you're using. And I think I like listening to the talk that comes right before me. And then I reference it in some ways. And, like, so I think at Sassiest, it was quite funny because when I came on stage, the first thing that you have to do is you have to build rapport with the audience, right? And most of these people do not know you, or I mean, some of them do. I always have trouble like figuring out, do most of the people now know me or not? I always assume not. So I think at Sassiest, what happened is that the guy before, he had a lot of charts that were just not looking that good, like in tech. I mean, his charts were good, but like, the performance, like layoffs and so forth. And I think the first thing that I came out is like, said, oh, wow, what a depressing presentation. I hope you're looking for good news because you're not getting them in my presentation. And it's little things like this that kind of connect what the people are in, because these people that are in the audience, they're not sitting with you backstage. They have been sitting in these seats for quite some time, right? Some of them are like, is this going to be interesting or not? Should I listen or not? And just kind of pretend to be one of them,
Yeah, it's a way to build the bridge to sort of be present with them.
Yeah, I really think that's really helpful. And I think otherwise, if you have anything that is kind of, I don't know whether the correct word is contemporary, but like, in the zeitgeist in terms of what is going on right now, a lot of my talks are referring things that are just very recent. So I'm pretty sure that I'm going to shit on the founder mode, which is a very typical topic right now. Maybe not. Yeah, I actually don't want to give it more attention. But yeah, like some things that have been happening and so forth. But like for me, it's a bit, I'm good like that in the sense of I can create jokes around it and I think they can land and so forth. But I also know that I can pull them off because you can make the best joke. If the delivery is not good, don't try to be a comedian if you don't enjoy being funny. That's really difficult.
Yeah, do what works. That's really good. Yep. This is a little adjacent topic wise, but there's so many people who start podcasts. It's not exactly public speaking, but it's.
Yeah, we need more podcasts. Yeah.
Is that a joke? Is that a joke? We need more.
That was a joke. Yes. We need so much more. I think everybody should have a podcast. Everybody. So we could just like, instead of going to LinkedIn, we could go on their podcast to see who they are.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're basically there, right? You've actually gotten to, 5,000 subscribers, which is high for the tech world, for a niche like that. What's the ROI on getting to 5,000 subscribers? Worth the work? Now that you're here, does it feel like there's a lot of benefit from it? What are your thoughts?
Do you think just like on the podcast side or like just in general, like on LinkedIn?
Let's go just podcast first. I want to ask you about LinkedIn too, but just podcast first.
So on the podcast, it's difficult. So like I'm not doing any sponsoring on the podcast right now. So I have not monetized the slots because I also was a bit too lazy to just send a salesperson out to sell all of these slots. I also wanted to have enough growth for this. So I think for me, the podcast has a couple of different value returns. And I think the first one is to have conversations with interesting people. It's a good excuse to just invite others and just have a conversation with me because I'm not the person who you're going to be like, hey, can we talk? I would like to pick your brain for 15 minutes. I always kind of feel like, I want to give something in return. And I think the podcast itself has developed to, I mean, it's not a huge one, right? Like, let's also be completely realistic. This is not a Lenny's podcast and so forth in terms of the reach. I will get him eventually, but
come on. And Dharmesh.
And Dharmesh. No, I will not catch him. But I think it has really given me a very good voice in terms of a different medium for different contexts for people to listen to that want to see more about a more honest perspective in tech. And I really, really struggle to kind of convey and bring this together, like this entire cringe stuff that is happening on LinkedIn, which is very alluring because you're always going for, oh, yeah, I need to get more impressions. I need to get more in this and that. And I feel like in 99% of the cases, I always stayed true to myself. And the podcast is one of these, right? Like, I'm not exactly known for softball interviews, but I'm also not being disrespectful. You cannot do that on a podcast as well. But like I challenge people, right? Like if I don't agree, I tell them and I try to really investigate, like, I'm actually interested in my guests. And I feel like this is a privilege that I have right now that more people want to now come on the podcast than I can actually book. Right. Just recently, it started to go up really hard. And I tell my assistant, check everyone that comes on whether they can speak. That's the most important thing. I actually don't care that much about what we talk about. It's more about, is it someone that can go back and forth? And yeah, that's the most important thing for me.
So it's led to some great relationships and networking, that sort of thing.
That for sure as well. And I think, listen, this entire business right now as well is very two-sided on my side. So first of all, I have a sales-led motion in any case where I just go and I try to get into companies that make a lot of money so I can make them more money. So they give me a lot of that more money a little bit to me, you know? So that part is obviously also very dependent on networking, connections, talking to VCs, private equity funds, and so forth. And these people do listen to your podcast. That does happen. So I have so much content out there that I know that when someone does a background check on me, they're just going to go randomly. They're not going to read my CV, right? Like what they do is they go into one of my distribution platforms and then they pick something randomly. Oh, look, I know this guy, right? Like, so for instance, I know Jason Fried. Let's see how she interacts with this person. So you get a feel for the person. And I think a podcast is something that is very, very hard to fake, right? Like this is not overproduced garbage for this one video that I have up, right? I have 100 episodes now or 80 or whatever it is when this one comes out. And
You really get to know the person.
yeah, and it's impossible to fake, right? Like this is PLG, right? Like I want to give an honest perspective about what I do. And the podcast is a very good medium for that. I'm not sure I would start a new one now. I'm very glad where I am right now because there's so many. Everybody wants to produce content and attention and grabbing and AI and I don't know. It's getting a bit much.
Yeah, makes total sense. That's great. Should we talk LinkedIn a little?
We can talk LinkedIn.
When did you sort of start that journey of like audience building? Not that you're deep into audience building, but
I mean, it's hard to say that I don't have an audience with 56,000 followers.
100%. I would imagine some of that has just come from speaking and reputation in the industry. Or well, maybe that's a good first question. Have you put time and energy into intentionally building that audience? Or has a lot of it just come from other stuff you're doing? Or tell us about that.
I would actually say that LinkedIn was my first kind of bid in regards to building some sort of, not building sort of a following. It was just like me kind of saying like, hey, this is something that I want to try because I saw how well it worked for Elena, who is always like 1 or 2 years ahead of me. I think she had at the time about, I don't remember actually, like 15 to 20,000 followers or something. And I was a nobody as well. And I'm like, you know what? I want to give this a try. And I was just like logging into my stuff now. I just seen, okay, so I think on the 1st of September, 2022 is when I started. So about 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 2 years ago. And I said, I'm going to post twice a day for 6 months at least.
Twice a day.
Yeah, twice a day for 6 months at least. And I was just churning out stuff like crazy. And I said, like, I'm not going to look, right? Like, I also know as a product person that, sometimes you just have to, you have to do the work. And it started to grow like crazy from there. Well, it's not actually true. The first 1,000 or 2,000 people was really, really rough.
How long to get to 2,000?
I don't see it here anymore, unfortunately. But I think it took about
months,
1.5 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and then at some point you make this in 2 days or 3 days, and then sometimes it flattens a little bit again and so forth. But I'm not that focused on followers anymore in that sense. It was just more important to me. Can I prove to myself that I can do this? And this was also one of the reasons why my entire career got going because I said like, hey, I'm not happy anymore at Small PDF. I know I need to go. So this was 3 to 4 months before I actually left the company. I started this kind of content mill, started to document everything also from my job and started to put my knowledge out there. Got incredibly good feedback as well. Also very valid criticism, which made me better. I'm very grateful for that as well. And yeah, my first head of product job afterwards at an AI company came also from this content. Like Andreas, who used to be a former colleague of mine, he knew me. He was like, hey, I really like the way that you're writing lately. We have this set of product gig available. Do you want to interview for this? And I'm like, yeah, sure. You know what? I want to see this. So I already had a perception in the market when this was happening. And the rest is really history in that sense. It's been really crazy. But there was a time where I was also starting to get a little bit afraid of LinkedIn because it's such a short lived medium. If you do not post for a week and so forth, you're being forgotten again, which is okay. But everything that you posted more than a month ago is very, very hard to access, right? Like it doesn't get any views, nothing. So it's not a good repository. This is why I started then Substack. And then shortly afterwards, Elena also followed. And I told her, like, hey, this is really cool stuff. You also need to do this because I feel like our stuff is getting lost otherwise. We were struggling so hard to kind of build a website around our frameworks because it's just so cumbersome, like to build always a new page. And then we really needed to have a blog that sort of encompasses this. And Substack was the solution for us in a sense. And this is also the main platforms, I think, where we live in terms of the longer form content.
That is fascinating. I didn't realize how recent your LinkedIn thing really popped off and how much it had sort of played into the career moves that you've made since then.
Yeah, no, it was a very deliberate decision. And then after 6 months, I saw the direction this takes. I did not have a lot of business coming in too, but I saw that if this continues, then I'm gonna go places. And yeah, that's what happened. I mean, I remember my goals, right? So like I'm always someone that does like a yearly planning, right? Like this is what I want to achieve, this is what I want to do. And back there, it was about, hey, I want to get 10,000 followers and so forth. The second was I want to get in front of 10 VCs because I knew that venture capital is quite important. I started to also get like a taste of like, hey, how does this actually work if you're, working with a board, if you're also at the leadership level, like conversations about selling and so forth. This was the first time where I really got closer to the startup and scale up scene because beforehand I was just like in enterprise gigs and I had these goals, right? So it was not just like LinkedIn, it was also like getting in front of VCs and so forth. And all of this paid off. It really worked well.
It's amazing. What advice would you give to somebody who's got 212 connections, decent career in tech, but has not touched the personal brand thing, has not built the LinkedIn thing at all? What thoughts would you give them?
Don't start unless you know how painful this is going to be because everybody's trying to do it right now.
It's worse than the podcast.
I mean, I don't know. It's just that I'm very glad that I can do what I can do. But I also think that I'm an exception because I have a specific kind of personality that comes across nice in a visual medium like this. And I think I'm lucky because LinkedIn is also now moving towards more video formats and so forth. So I think the entire industry is moving more to like this kind of personal touch. Hey, maybe LinkedIn is not for you. Maybe Twitter is something that is more for you, or like Substack or whatever. I think like always pick your poison very carefully because one is long form, the other one is short form, and the other one is like sort of in the middle. But whatever you do, don't even start it if you don't enjoy it. I actually think that it's very, very hard. And you can build up optionality and brand through your network without having to turning your insights out on LinkedIn. I really don't think so because there's so much cringe right now on LinkedIn. Like, oh my God, yeah, I have consulted with 5,000 companies. I have read 200 books in product management. It's all bullshit. I just know these people do not have the time for this. It's just like, it's bullshit. Like, why do we have to do this? Because one guy over there did it and he got like, oh my God, I got 2,000 impressions. I need to get 2,000 impressions. It's like, fuck off. It's just not good. It's not genuine.
That's interesting is you say unless you're prepared for how painful it's going to be. What feels painful about it?
Yeah, but you know how it is, right? Like you have a kid. Having a kid is not difficult. What is difficult is when you're feeling sick, you need quiet time and you're being on the clock for someone else. That is what's difficult, right? Like maybe your wife is out of town and you have to watch the kids fully and now you're getting sick as well. And then the kid, like, or God forbid, the kid gets sick and so, like something goes wrong. As soon as something is out of the ordinary, this is where the stress is starting. And you have to understand, when I was going into surgery for my thyroid, like I had to remove my thyroid, one of the thoughts that I had 30 minutes before getting wheeled in, I was like, oh shit, I didn't post yet. And I remember what post that was because it was one of the first ones that ever went viral. It was about Spotify and some other bullshit. So I wrote this post actually on the hospital bed.
Oh,
This is not healthy, man. This is not healthy. And I'm not kidding, right? But I said to myself back then, like consistency is going to be everything and so forth. But I would not do it again this way anymore. But I feel like nothing is that hard unless it really gets out of the rudder, right? And then you're going to, because you just don't have it. As soon as you do not have a choice anymore, because you said, like, look, this is my constant, right? And kids oftentimes are like these kind of cornerstones in their life that you cannot make compromises around. And I just made basically LinkedIn my,
LinkedIn is your child.
yeah, it's not healthy. But I think you can still make a conscious decision and say, like, yes, I want to build this out and so forth. But know what you want to get out of this. If you want to get a consulting business going or like some optionality and so forth, then I think maybe it can work. But if you're really passionate about what you are saying, like if you enjoy teaching like I do, because teaching means that I'm the person who reads the rule books, that tries to understand and is also trying to kind of implement it and so forth, and you can turn this into a paying hobby, then that sounds good. I think you should do that. Yeah.
Yeah. The teaching part, that feels like a good handle or good sort of perspective on it because it does seem like at the end of the day that really is what gets traction is like people follow people. I mean, unless you're sort of the inspirational type, but the accounts that really seem to bring a lot of value and got a lot of traction, it's because people are learning something they didn't know before. So if you genuinely have something to say and you love teaching it, maybe it's a good idea.
Yeah, but you know where this goes from, right? Like you have also a very good positioning, I think, like in terms of LinkedIn, right? Like it's very clear that you what you want to do and so forth, and you also have a background in. It's not that you came up in the day and like we're just like, I'm going to write about public speaking on LinkedIn. I've never done that. No, you already have some experience from your own stage speaking and so forth. You know how to hold a microphone and so forth, right? Like like how to woo a crowd a little bit. And I think at least have some kind of passion piece somewhere that is connected to this, but just like the goal, just like, oh, I want to make money with this. It's not going to work.
Yeah, you got to be really good at something.
Yeah, but you know why it's not going to work if you're just doing it for the money? Because on these days where it becomes difficult, you will lack the inspiration, the energy, and the drive to do anything about it. That is the difference.
Especially when you're trying to do something that requires creativity. Like the money can get you sitting down in front of your computer, but it's not going to give you a good idea.
If you think about this first year where I was writing every day twice, and I mean, like a full LinkedIn post, not just like people should be nice to each other. I never wrote this kind of bullshit one-liners, right? Like I always like wrote like full on like, something with a learning in there and so forth, because I'm just like that. If you do that, you're going to be prepared to talk about 700 times about something in tech. Some of it is recycled. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. Like also like after 4 or 5 months, you go back to something that performed, you kind of rewrite it a little bit, you make it a little bit better. But by and large, you have to have 400 or 500 independent ideas. It's like, good luck figuring something out like this if you just want to peddle the money.
Wow, that's a great perspective. Yeah,
It's just like, no, you better like the stuff because you need to come up with new things on the spot.
you can't fake it with 400 or 500 posts.
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, unless they're very, very short and just like this surfacial crap that just does not have any depth.
Yeah. Let's say you have that passion, you have the drive, you've got the willingness, and you're like, I'm doing it. Any advice for that person? Let's say they fit the ideal LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, I think I had about 20 to 30 people so far where I tried to explain in one-on-one conversations on how to do this in detail, right? So, laying out like the kind of the framework, like how LinkedIn works, when you should post, when you should not post, like how to structure a hook and so forth and all this kind of crap. Never worked. Not a single time. The thing is with people is that they think it is about the methodology that you use, but the thing that holds them back then afterwards to really do it is this fear of, but what if someone reads this? Which is kind of like antagonistic to what you actually want to do, right? Like you want a lot of people to read it, but not those people.
Who's those people?
The people in my company, the people who I have worked with. I'm an imposter. I don't deserve this. What if my dad reads this? What if my family sees this? What if? We are so afraid of judgment from others, especially in the beginning on this kind of stuff. And I call this always the LinkedIn police, right? And I had my run-ins as well. I also got in trouble as well. And, I'm not going to lie to you in that sense, but you just have to get over this. If you make your opinion public, then yeah, it's going to be a public opinion and something might happen. But the reality is, when you're starting out and your stuff stinks, the good thing about LinkedIn is nobody's going to read it. You're not going to accidentally spread this to like 500,000 people because it's shit. That's not what happens. You know how many posts it takes for getting one over, like, you need hundreds of posts before you get the one that has more than 100, more than 200 engagements. It's just how it is, right? Like, it just takes a lot of time. First of all, you don't have the followers, you're not a brand yet. Nobody's going to listen. What's going to more likely happen is you're going to post something that you've worked on for 2 hours, and then there's one like, maybe from your mom or from your dad or like from your brother or something. You need to be okay with that. And because you need to kind of understand that you need to build rapport in a market slowly, piece by piece. I started the same. Elena started the same. We all started the same. That's just how it is. What you need to look out for is the growth. If you grow from 500 impressions per post to 1,000 within 2 to 3 months, you have double your impressions. It's not that you have 500 more, it's that you doubled. Because if you double this again, which is exactly what's happening for a long time, then you go from 500 to 1,000, and then from 1,000 to 2,000, then to 4,000, then to 8,000, 16,000, 32,000, and so forth. And that's what you have to understand. And this comes very natural to me because I talk a lot about product-led growth, where we look at trajectories like this instead of just like, absolute numbers. And that's why consistency is everything. It's not about how many impressions did you get. It's about how many do I get this month compared to the last month, right? Because I automatically get better. Every time I push something out, I also start to know like what works and what doesn't work. And then you get fans, right? You have some people that are just like, they're always around, right? So that's also a weird moment, I think.
Yeah. So you got to be willing to say stuff, risk people thinking it's stupid, risk, the sort of judgment side of it.
I have an opinion. Look, I can tell you this, right? So you also have made some graphs, right? Like that involved other people's names in it and so forth. Like I was also part of it and so forth. The first time that I was placed in a graph was, I think, Elon Musk or something. I don't know.
The most cringe.
No, that's fine. So what the thing is that when you start to measure others in your content, and this also goes for public speaking, right? Like if you talk about other people, there's suddenly a new dimension that is coming. Let's take something very, very innocent. Like I'm going to congratulate everyone that I'm looking up to. It's not hard to name a couple of people, but it's very easy to forget a couple, right? So now I'm starting to think like, oh shit, what is this person going to think if I don't mention them, right? And because this is how we work, right? Like, and this is where it starts to get really so. Oftentimes, people just go for the safe option and they start to be a little bit vague, or they do not want to criticize people on LinkedIn and so forth. And it's just that, I don't know, it really pays to have a unique point of view. And you can also criticize and really put people a little bit sometimes into the bad corner. That's totally fine. I mean, not like specifically people, but, like I criticize a lot NPS or like Safe or the CEO from Spotify. I also threw him under the bus a couple of times just because they make shit decisions, like these people will never end up on my podcast. But it's like, it's okay, because I have an opinion that I can stand behind and I feel like, hey, it's all good, I think so.
It's good. Last one. A lot of people have talked about how the journey, not that, LinkedIn influencers are famous like celebrities, right? But there's a certain amount of platform recognition, whatever. A lot of people have talked about that sort of the more you rise in that thing, the smaller your world gets, the smaller your friend circle gets, the more lonely it becomes. Have you seen that to be true for your journey?
Yeah, 100%. And I think I usually call this like I'm a D-list celebrity. I'm not an A-lister. I'm not on the level of Tom Hanks or whatever, but I'm a D-list celebrity until I go to an event where people start to know me, right? So the weird thing is like, let's say you go to a conference, like a relatively big one. And this happens to me quite often, especially on the product conferences where, like, I don't know, I'm just going to say a number, like 20 to 30% of the people know you. And then within these, maybe 20 or 30 people are super fans of yours. Like they really, really like your stuff. Most of them are extremely respectful and they're very, very nice. But it is weird that you're getting so much attention because you see that people are staring. You notice that whenever you come off stage, there's a big crowd around you because this is their opportunity to get some time off of you. And this is very stressful. And I had to kind of learn how to just go to conferences for my talk and then leave immediately. Or at least be only present for a very given time. Like for 30 minutes, I'm going to answer questions and then I just go. And this is weird because I've never experienced this before. Like, I'm gladly talking about PLG, but what people do is they come to you and then they tell you their entire life story and you're just standing there and like, I'm sorry, I don't know you, right? Like, I also don't want to hurt you and so forth. And like these parasocial relationships, as we call them, are very, very weird. And so the effect that this has on your other life, at least to me, is that because you get so much attention throughout your day, LinkedIn, Substack, there you go to conferences and so forth. If you have some shred of introvertedness in you, and I have a lot of that in me, you just need silence and a very kind of small circle. There's very, very few friends that really understand what I'm doing. And yeah, Elena being one of them, and she's also a hyper introvert, much more than me even. But we know what this means, right? Like, we do not need to explain to each other, like the thing that I just tried to explain to you. Like, we know how this feels, right? We know that, hey, after a talk, like we need to just bolt, but we know why. And yeah, so it really does a little bit like, shrink the thing for sure.
Yeah. Makes total sense. There's always tough sides to success, right?
It is a bit of a scary one. There is this, which was the guy who wrote the book, like the 4-Hour Work Week or whatever.
Oh yeah. I don't remember, but I know what you're talking about.
Tim Ferriss, I'm not a big fan of him at all, but like he has a good article about what it did to him to be prominent or like really like a celebrity. Like, he's a really big one in tech. I think that's fair to say. And this article scared me a little bit because it feels like a cat that you cannot let back into the bag again. He talks about stalkers. He talks about people who are just weird. And it's not that he was like, he's talking about stuff that I talk about, like things in tech. How do you organize your work week and so forth? Like what makes you, nothing dirty. But the problems this introduces sometimes with people who just do not know boundaries. It's just a question of time. And for me as a woman, it's anyways a bit scary because, yeah, I don't need to say anything else, right? Like, it's just scary 100%. For me.
Thanks for sharing that.
You're very welcome. It's not that dramatic, but it sounded a little bit like it.
No, I appreciate it. And with that, we are right up to time. So thanks for coming on the pod today.
I should come more to this podcast. I really like it.
We'll definitely have you back.
Thank you so much, Vince. Thank you for doing me this favor.
You're so welcome.
I really like talking about public speaking while publicly speaking about it.
Yeah, no, truly, thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Okay, and then that's the end of this episode, right? Ba-boom. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtharin.com, which is leahtharin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.